Stephen, and I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. If I could get a nod or a note that folks can see my screen here, that'd be great.
I can see it.
Excellent. All right, so I am going to go ahead and share an update on sort of how we are developing our master planning process. And as Stephen mentioned, we really want this to be a discussion-oriented conversation. So I'm going to have two different points in time where we can talk both about the master planning process and then again about some of the things we're seeing in survey results and in conversations we've been having to date about our priorities. So what you kind of see here is the run of show, or what you can expect from the presentation this afternoon. First, we're going to run through a little bit of background on the statute, talk about our process, talk about expectations, what you can expect of us, what we need from you, and some important dates. And then we're going to pivot into a conversation around what we're hearing from stakeholders like yourselves around the priorities for this master plan. So first, I wanted to kind of situate this in the context of legislation. So 497202 is commonly known as THEC's duties statute. This is where our commission derives the authority and responsibility for this plan. And something that you're going to notice in this plan, and I've highlighted here and I won't read over for you, is some of the specificity that's outlined as expectations or things we need to be thinking about in the creation of this plan. Things like educational attainment, alignment, workforce development. There are several provisions that we as a body need to be considering as we move forward with this plan. Also in statute is the statutory committee, as we call it. This is a review committee to aid in the development of the master plan and the funding formula. Stephen just went over this a bit, but this is that first convening of this group in order to really kick off this master plan in earnest, as well as to really hear from you all about what you see as the priorities and how you feel about the process that we're setting up, what suggestions and ideas that you have. So in addition to the Master Plan Statutory Committee and you all, we have a few other key stakeholders to this process. Stephen outlined at the top that this is supposed to set the statewide vision for higher education in the state. And so importantly, we really need to involve a whole host of different individuals in this process in order to have that buy-in, but also for folks to recognize where they plug into this higher education master plan. So in addition to this committee, we have our commission, which heard about this master plan process about a week and a half ago, as well as state agency leaders. Think of the Department of Education, the Department of Labor and Workforce Development, our State Board of Education, and others. We also have education organizations that really help us to facilitate a lot of higher education policy in the state, including Tennessee Achieves, the AIRS Foundation, and SCORE, among others. And of course, we have THEC, TSEC staff, as well as institution and system staff who help to further and implement a lot of higher education policy in the state. So up until this point, what I've done is really laid the foundation of the who and the why we're together this afternoon. But now I want to talk a little bit about how we're proposing to go about the master planning process. And so to frame this out, there are really two goals that we've
Amanda?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you real quick. When I was looking through the roster, I didn't notice that Chairman Mark White was on. Want to welcome him to this group as well. Going back to that last slide, there are, of course, overlaps between those groups as well that are going to be here. We have the comptroller who's also on our commission. So that allows for that continuity across all these key stakeholders when we finalize this plan. Sorry, Amanda, and thank you. And welcome, Chairman White, as well.
Thanks for those additions, Stephen. So as I was saying, we have really two goals that we've identified for this master planning process. The first is one that's sort of been echoed throughout this conversation already, to ensure that the statewide master plan for higher education is developed collaboratively and with input from key stakeholders like yourself and those that were mentioned in that previous slide. The second goal being to develop a focused and living document that sets the vision for higher education and state partners through the establishment of priorities and goals for higher education. So this is not only going to be a document that we can all agree on and see in print, but is something that we are embedding into our day-to-day work. As Stephen mentioned, there are key strategies and responsibilities that we have where we would want this master plan to have influence. So now I want to talk a little bit about how we're organizing that work. And we've really kind of conceptualized this in 3 phases. The first is this collecting information and perspectives phase. I'd say that's the phase that we are actively in right now. This is where we're doing some background research and context setting. We're identifying who needs to be involved as a part of this process. We've administered a survey, which you'll hear a bit more about here shortly. And we've also been partnering with Education Strategy Group to help us facilitate some important conversations with stakeholders. They have actually done several interviews with stakeholders to dig in more deeply on what they see as the priorities for the master plan in Tennessee. That is really culminating what is phase 1, which is helping inform how we set up and organize phase 2, which we're calling the collaboration and consensus building phase. We're envisioning 5 topical working groups, informed again by the priorities set in the survey, as well as those conversations with ESG, to really dig in on the challenges and priorities for higher education in the state. What is the context that is needed? What are the issues? Do we have agreement on those issues? And then really ideate and generate recommendations for a Tennessee-specific way forward. These meetings will really serve as foundations for the master plan itself, the briefings and the output from those conversations. And alongside these meetings, we will also be working with our facilitator to conduct listening tours and focus groups, again, designed to hear from stakeholders, including yourselves, about how you're feeling about how this is developing and evolving, what things you think are missing, what concerns or issues you see as part of the process. And then finally, a phase that will really begin in earnest this summer is the creation and iteration. And this is where we take what we've learned over the past several months and develop the plan itself. That, of course, will involve drafting and writing, but then also importantly, the review and revision. So this is going to be a lot of conversations with folks like yourselves, pressure testing, so to speak, some of these ideas, hearing feedback and gleaning that to ultimately present what will be a final master plan in October. So talking a little bit about this process, I want to kind of share a little bit about what you can expect from us as part of this. So, of course, we brought you all together this afternoon, and we want to hear more from you here shortly about what you're thinking on this process. But you can also expect, in the meantime, monthly updates from us. This will take place in the form of an email to this group to sort of share where we're at. We'd also expect this group to participate in various of those topical working group meetings, as I mentioned before, you all being key stakeholders to higher education in the state. We'll also have quarterly updates at our statutory committee meetings. It should have been in the past week that you all had 2 additional meetings put on your calendars in May and in August, and I'll get back to those dates here in a moment. We are also envisioning that you all would be an audience for those education strategy group listening tours and focus group conversations. And these are going to be spaces for some one-on-one discussion. I think a few folks on this call have already participated in some of those conversations. And then finally, we're aiming to do or complete this process and get final approval from our commission in October of 2025, designing this so that we can launch publicly this master plan in mid-October, when we will be gathering the boards of trustees from across all of the public institutions in the state. Now, to build a little bit off of what Stephen said at the outset, in order for us to do this well and to create a document and a plan that really has the buy-in and the power to be implemented, we really need a few things from you all. And as Stephen mentioned, really your engagement throughout this process, whether that's in these meetings or in those topical work groups or as part of the listening tours and focus groups, really to have your participation and your communication on this front. We'd love to hear what you're thinking and feeling as we talk through this process. Shared understanding. Something I think that was really helpful, what Stephen outlined, is there are a lot of different ways we could talk about what a master plan is. I think we need to make sure we're all using consistent language and meaning the same things when we're communicating in order to be sure that we have shared understanding among our group. And of course, collaboration, and then again, that transparency. the master plan is this large plan designed for everybody to see their part in the higher education ecosystem in our state. And so this also offers us spaces where we might need to address topics where there isn't perfect alignment or agreement. And so this is an important place for us to be able to have those conversations. Again, this master plan will ultimately be reviewed and approved by our commission. And a lot of the conversation here is going to be really important for us as we develop and form up this master plan itself. So with that, I wanted to just again point out two important dates. Those are emboldened here on the screen, and hopefully you all should have those calendar invites, but we'll make sure that everybody gets those sent out again just in case. For follow-up conversations at the two future phases of this master planning process. But with all of that, I want to go ahead and pause at this moment to open the floor for conversation and hear what questions you all have about the process that I've just outlined and any comments or feedback you might have. And I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment.
Stephen, this is Phil. I guess this is a question for you primarily. It's really a practical matter around timing of this. Now, my belief is that to be successful, this really needs to be an outside-in kind of planning process. It really needs to be driven by our constituency groups and what the state expects out of higher education, primarily, not what we think necessarily, but obviously that's important. But the most important stakeholder probably in this going forward is going to be the next governor. And we don't know who the next governor is going to be. So, we could see this plan approved and then a year later could be totally disconnected from the priorities of the next governor. So have you got any thoughts about that?
I do, and thank you, President Oldham, for asking that question. A similar thing happened back in 2015 when we created that master plan, and then Governor Lee came in shortly thereafter in 2019, but it was pretty close to that creation. This is something that we are grappling with. I know that TBR is going to grapple with, and the State Board of Education, who's working on their master plan as well, are. And it's why on the outset of things, there needs to be and I think Amanda's survey results will show, I imagine there's a lot of things in there that will ring true with any future governor that will come in. What we have been hearing and talking with people here at the state level is more of a concern of, say, landing on a next drive to 55. That was primarily the challenge we ran into with the prior drive to 55. That was one governor's big charge behind it. And while it was still successful in rallying the troops, a big goal like that, we need to be smart on the front end on when we time that rolling out as well. So I think we have had conversations with the State Board of Education about perhaps approaching this together. And as we develop this and as we know who candidates are, perhaps having some frontward conversations there. But I think, yes, President Oldham, we do run into that same challenge. On the other hand, we're getting the opposite pressure from a lot of our stakeholders, both in government and General Assembly, asking, where are we going with higher education? And I don't think that can wait for another 2 years. I think we need to have a plan of action, and I think we just need to be delicate about what we put into that plan, knowing that priorities might shift. But I welcome any feedback on that to give us guidance on what you think about how we approach that.
So let me ask this of the group. Do you all see any gaps in this process? I really appreciate, President Oldham, your point about changing leadership at the state level. I think that's definitely an important risk and something we need to be thinking through. But are there other gaps in this process that you all see?
Well, I'll just add, I guess, and I'm thinking out loud. I don't really know the best way to approach this. One way would be to create a strategic plan that you start out dealing with the obvious safe parts, and then you build into the plan a sort of a holding place for the future governor to put their print on it, and you anticipate that and you build that into the plan. That way you're not having to recreate everything after the fact, and it's just sort of understood that that's going to be part of the process. It's so in other words, you got a plan hopefully that gets approved in October, but part of that plan is that you have another part of the plan yet to be determined, if that makes any sense.
It does. So essentially just like recognizing it and naming that on the front end, and if anything, in the actual plan, more to come section, perhaps. Thank you.
Hi, Stephen and Amanda. This is Bernie Savage from the UT system. Good to see everybody. I'd say it's nothing to disagree with yet. I think what was shared at a high level is hard to disagree with. I really appreciate the focus on collaboration, stakeholder engagement, consensus building. I think all those parts are really key pillars that we would support and look forward to engaging with.
Thank you.
All right. All right.
Okay, just one thing, I guess, to just take on what Phil was talking about. I know there's uncertainty about what we might face with the next administration, but I guess with strategic plans in particular, I mean, look, we have to do the best we can, and I view this as a strategic plan. I know we call it the master plan, but I view it as the strategic plan, if you will, for higher education. We all have to do the best we can at what we know, right? We do the situational analysis. We look at where we think it's going. We develop a plan to get there. And, I don't know that placeholders or leaving things, unknown help, because we don't know what's coming up in the next couple of years with the next administration, or even know the next couple of years of what's going on in DC or anywhere else, right? I think the best thing we can do is develop a plan for what we believe based upon the evidence we have right now and where we believe it's going. And then, in 2 years, we get a governor that says, no, I do not like this plan. Well, you know what? That's the governor's prerogative, right? And then he says, go back, he or she says, go back and do another plan. And we go back and do another plan.
Thank you, President Hargrave. And I look to TBR's last plan as well. I know they're thinking through this, making it a living, breathing plan, one that can morph more quickly and be nimble over time, and not just sitting on the shelf.
So let me ask another question then of this group. Obviously, as this process has been outlined, it trends towards the engagement of our principals, many of you all on this call. How can we incorporate your staff and their voices into this process?
And this is Brian Nolan at East Tennessee State University. You have a number of constituency groups that are already structured. So the chief academic officers, the chief planning officers, I would work through those respective groups. Don't know if you plan on having some campus visits that are open, but if you're wanting real feedback from the institutions, I would use those natural affiliate organizations from the provost on down the line to gain feedback and input.
Great, thank you.
And Amanda, I guess for me, being like representing the commissioner of F&A, I think being able to identify decision points as early as possible is advantageous to me, so that I can go back to the commissioner and say, hey, this is sort of a decision point that's coming up. or these are options that are being laid out there, and get his view of those. Because I think sometimes, particularly in these larger groups, sometimes decision points pop up at the meeting. And so you may not have time to go back and confer with your, with the person you're representing on the call to get their point of view or their input on it. So I think anything we can do to identify, decisions that need to be made, policy decisions that need to be made as early as possible, so that input can be brought in from other folks that need to be.
Great. Thanks, Greg.
Question for you, Amanda and Stephen. Is there a plan to work with a firm of some kind, or will this be managed in-house by THEC? I've seen groups use everything from governance structures, frameworks, timelines, project management tools, and techniques. That might, I think, help inform some of your questions as well. But just curious what your approach might be.
Yeah, great question, Bernie. So we are partnering with Education Strategy Group, who's really helping us with facilitation of those topical work groups that I mentioned before. So some of the pre-work presentations and otherwise of those meetings. They're also helping us to do some of the stakeholder engagement that really allows for, I think, some conversations to occur without THEC staff necessarily being in the meeting itself. And so hoping that helps to offer some further insight from stakeholders. So we are partnering with them as part of this process. And then otherwise, a project team at THEC is really going to help kind of progress this work forward.
I should say the team lead at Education Strategy Group is someone well known at Tennessee higher education. That's Dr. Kenyatta Lovett. He's being our partner on that. So we're really grateful that we have them to lean on for this.
That's great. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Okay. If there are no further questions or comments on this part, what I'm going to go ahead and do then is go back and share my screen and wrap out the second part of this presentation, which is to dig into the survey results that I mentioned, that have been mentioned now a few different times. So let's go ahead and get that pulled up. I think hopefully everybody can see that. Thanks for the thumbs up there. So now I want to talk a little bit about the information that we've been gathering so far in this process. All of you should have received a survey that we administered back in December and January of this earlier part of the year. This survey was created and informed by external sources. Think the State Higher Education Executive Office's annual policy priorities survey, Inside Higher Ed priorities survey, as well as it was reviewed by THEC leadership and our partners at Education Strategy Group. Really, the survey was designed to help us understand responses to a few different things. One, what are the issues and concerns that are facing higher education in our state? Another, to ask you all to rank or prioritize those issues, and then also to identify any obstacles you see to addressing those issues. These results, as I mentioned before, are being used to help really drive forward what are those 5 topical working groups that will meet this spring. What you can see on the right-hand part of this slide here is a pie chart sort of demonstrating who all completed this survey. A total of 95 individuals received this survey, and we had 57 complete responses. What you can see is that the majority of those respondents were presidents or chancellors. And I'll make a note here, while the statutory committee is represented by the independent system, so we have a representative from the UT system as well as the Board of Regents. This survey also went to each of the presidents or chancellors of their institutions. And so that really represents the fact that they are a larger majority of this overall survey recipient group. State government leadership being the second largest group at 14%, our THEC commission also being another large group of respondents, and then a mix of folks from the General Assembly and education organizations, and a few individuals who are not identified. So that's sort of some of the background about what this survey is and who took it. I now want to move on to some of the responses that we saw. So the first question we asked were, how important are the following issues on a scale of not important to very important? And what you can see on the slide here is that this is organized by the greatest number of items responded to, the greatest number of individuals who responded as very important to the survey items, starting from the top and working down. So what we can see here is that emerging workforce needs is one of the most important issues individuals identified, and everyone agreed is very important. As we look ahead, public perception of higher education is another issue that folks thought were very important. What I'd like to highlight here, though, is that a lot of these particular issue items were identified as somewhat or very important by survey respondents. In fact, when we presented this content to our commission recently, the issue of academic preparedness of incoming students was definitely something that got some discussion in our group. As you can see, almost all survey respondents identified this as a somewhat or a very important issue. So this was one of the matrix questions that we asked the group. The second, and this one is a little bit trickier to see, so bear with me here, is how concerned are you about the following issues? And this was rated on the scale of not concerned to very concerned. Again, what you're seeing is that these items are organized by the most selections of very concerned and down. So while you can see towards the bottom there that there were a couple of items where less than half of respondents were somewhat or very concerned, which included things like accreditation, academic freedom, research and development. We did see things like student success and student mental health, with more than 85% of respondents indicating that they were somewhat or very concerned about these issues as it relates to higher education. And again, you can see that variation throughout the list, with things like campus safety, maintenance and operation, return on investment, and state support for financial aid also being issues where a large portion of respondents were somewhat or very concerned. So then we asked individuals to prioritize the issues, and they, in particular, asking them to rank the top 5 they would like to see addressed in our master plan. So this particular question was designed to focus really on how we transition what we were hearing in those responses into our master plan itself. We used a weighted rank to identify the top issues identified by respondents. And what you can see are some things that are consistent with what we had seen in previous 2 slides. Emerging workforce needs being the top priority issue that was ranked for many of our respondents. Campus safety, student success, the increasing costs of salary and operating, state financial investment at public colleges, and public perception being among those ranked issues. I mentioned this earlier in my presentation, but alongside this survey administration, our partners at Education Strategy Group have also conducted interviews with various stakeholders. These interviews were designed to get a bit more deeply into what folks see as priorities for this master plan and what they hope to see as this process develops. And I won't read everything that's on this slide here. This is importantly in development. ESG has recently completed all of their interviews, and we will have a complete report from them here shortly. But I do see that a question has popped up, so I'm going to go ahead and pause for that question. Mr. Radford?
Hello, good afternoon. Will Radford, Tennessee State University. On the previous slide, are you able to pop back to that? I have a question.
Yes.
As it stands, what are the top 3 emerging workforce needs for the state of Tennessee? Is that data that was answered or collected any part of this, or is that a part of what you already have?
It's a great question. We did not collect any specific information on the parts of those workforce needs, but we do envision that being a part of this conversation as we organize those topical work groups. We do have a few different ways we collect this information. We've also been in conversations with individuals from the Boyd Center for Business and Economic Research around this area. As we both know, we have some reports to identify needs that we currently know, but then there's also a need for future workforce demands, things we might not currently even have on our radar that we want to be sure we address.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yes. So with what ESG was finding, I want to just highlight a few themes that I think are important as this group grapples with how we move forward. First, interviewees are eager for a new vision for higher education in the state. There are things around aligning higher education in the workforce, expanding access and improving affordability, setting this master plan up for the future, and one that resonates with all sectors and institutions as part of this process. So as I mentioned, they are finalizing their process now, and we will have a survey report, or a report, excuse me, on their interviews here shortly. In closing, what I wanted to do is use this slide here to kind of blend what we learned as part of some of the open-ended responses in the survey, which was to answer a question about those obstacles to resolving the top 5 issues, as well as some of the information that we learned from education strategy groups conversations. And so we see establishing a unifying vision being a really important item for us to be thinking through as this master plan evolves. Combating those public perception concerns altogether. Positioning higher education as a driver of economic mobility and workforce readiness. And I won't read on, but really there are, I think, some key themes for us as we look ahead and things we need to be sure we incorporate into this next master plan. And what I'll say is this, in terms of our process, we're actively right now developing the working groups that we've been talking about. So thinking through what those topics are and the scope of those issues. And then what we're going to do is blend information from the conversations we had with our commission, this conversation this afternoon, and others as we move towards this next phase, which will be bringing together those topical groups for further discussion. So I'd like to close this part of the presentation with any questions folks that might have about this or in general. And yeah, happy to have that discussion.
Hey, Amanda, it's Bill Hargrave here. A question back on the just the survey, the 2025 priority survey that showed the respondents. This is more curious than anything else. So you sent it to 97, you got 57 responses. I was trying to jot down the numbers as you were saying, so I think that's right. And 54% of the respondents were presidents or chancellors, which means that was 30 or 31 were presidents or chancellors. How many presidents and chancellors do we have in the state? I mean, obviously we don't have that many on the call or the meeting today. So is that like every TCAT and every TBR?
Yes,
I mean,
great
every
question.
2-year?
It is every public institution. I don't have that number off the top of my head either. I'm sure somebody knows who knows all the TCATs in community college. Well, all the TCATs off the top of their head does. But I can definitely get you that number.
No, I was trying to get a sense for because the results, right, could really vary based upon who you're asking. Right. And if you got 30 responses, and I'm gonna make up a number, and this is, I'm not suggesting the results are not valid or that I don't agree with them, but they could, let's say that 20 of those of the 30 were TCAT leaders. Well, that's probably a very different perspective on higher education than what we would have as a doctoral granting R1 institution. So I say that with some caution about the ranking of how important some of these things are at this point, because I think we'd all agree those are all important issues, but that the relative ranking of those, as you kind of put there of, well, this is the outcomes and this is the ranking, I would just be a little bit cautious about saying this represents everybody, because I don't think it does. It depended upon what the results from the respondents were, since it was a fairly small group, but could be overwhelmed by one group or another, for what it's worth.
No, and that's why, go ahead, Amanda.
I appreciate that comment, and something we do intend to release as part of this process is sort of a survey analysis type document. So something going beyond these slides here, and we'll definitely address that. We did, for just quick reference, had 57 of 95 responses. And so about a 60% response rate, which is good. But I think your point about any particular group perhaps influencing that more heavily is an important point for us to address.
An example there is that, like, for the past year, I've been talking about how we need to lean more into research and development as being a value of higher education. And that ranked low on that list, and that makes sense if you have, a lot of organizations who are maybe not having that as a prime focus. So I do look forward to looking at the crosstabs of that and seeing especially a reflection of this body, what we see rising to the top as well. To go further with that sentiment, a challenge that we've had with our former review committee has been that since focus, this body here, which is the same body as the former review committee, has gotten even more institution heavy. With 6 LGI presidents, TBR, UT, I always want to be sure that we also get as much voice as we can from those that are non-institutions on here as well, and looking at that survey to see what did the chairs of our education and finance committees say is most important to them, or the commissioner of F&A or the comptroller and our constitutionals. That would also help inform those rankings too. So thank you, President Hargrave, for making that point.
Well, and I think by stratifying that, those responses too, it gives you insight to your point, Stephen, about, look, if you look at maybe what the non-educational entities or non-institutional entities said is important versus what the 4 years thinks is important versus what the 2 years said, right? I think there's some good information, and it could be a starting point for a conversation, right? Of saying, wait, you know what, just at the start, we're misaligned on what we see as the priorities. How do we get some consensus around those, or how do we reconcile those differences that may be there? Or it may be that they're completely aligned, which would be fantastic.
That's a really great suggestion. Thank you.
Amanda, that is doable, right? Because we did ask for, great, awesome. I look forward to seeing that.
Well, and I would just add to what Bill's saying, because I agree completely. I think you've got to, that's heavily weighted toward within academia, those results. I mean, we've got to get more input from outside of the traditional academic communities. Otherwise, we're going to be trying to do things that the state is not supportive of, and everybody will get frustrated with that. So.
That's a great point. Thank you. If I could build off of that point, are there any examples across this group of ways you've effectively engaged the public or other entities around sort of that sentiment around higher education?
I mean, outside of how we do it here, when I meet with legislators and I go to Chairman White's office, we update on what we see as the big issues of higher education. Then also want to hear their perspectives. But I know that this is the first time that we have surveyed in this manner. I don't know if other entities on this call have done so in a different way, or focus groups with your local delegation, or what that looks like.
Amanda, Bill and I serve on a group called the Tennessee Leadership Business Council that made up of CEOs really across the state. And I think that would be a good group to get some input on. Don't you think, Bill? A very influential group that really covers the gamut in terms of business and industry at a very high level.
Yeah, it's a great suggestion. Yeah, it is, and it is statewide. Now that's the other thing we have to be careful of, right? That we're asking the entire state and not geographic, just certain geographic areas. So, Cindy, that's a great example. That's a great suggestion. Yeah.
Thanks, President McBee.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from this group here today is to lean more into having a flexible plan, or recognizing that we'll need to update it in a couple of years due to gubernatorial changes that are on the horizon. To provide some cross-tab analysis of what we're seeing from the surveys, and perhaps I'd love to see that just as a not an official report, but some analysis that we can send out to this group here so that you can understand what those top priorities are by segment of that pie chart. And then looking at higher ed specifically by 4-year, 2-year TCAT as well. Dr. Noland, you mentioned the groups that we already convened, chief academic officers, CFOs, others as well, bouncing ideas off of them during our regularly called meetings. And of course, President McPhee, you mentioned the group as well. I know Amanda got that down. Other chambers, another like business roundtable as well, perhaps too. So it's been really helpful to us in guiding our next steps. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I do have a
Greg?
question, and I
Yes.
apologize if I missed this. There was a mention of 5 topical working groups, and I didn't know if those had been mentioned or identified, and then the individuals on those working groups had already been grouped as well.
Great question, Greg. We're actually actively in the process of forming up those groups. So really determining that scope and then the participation. And so I'm hopeful that in the next 2 weeks, we'll at least have our first group formally scheduled, but we will be looking to schedule those through between March and May of this year.
And a follow-up, Amanda, are those themes being determined based on the priorities? And it sounds like based on this conversation that those might still be being determined. And so it might be too early. I guess what's the process between the priorities we see on the slides today and what might get us to a theme for a working group? And how would this group be engaged in that process from today into that future state?
Great question. So we are continuing to analyze those results, as well as blending this with information that ESG is collecting as part of their interviews and conversations to create or to identify those topical groups. This body, I'd envision many folks would be a part of some of those topical groups, but also to be helping to inform some of those pieces. I think Stephen just suggested, which I think is a great idea, some of that more in-depth analysis being shared with this group and seeing where there may or may not be resonance with what is ultimately gleaning from those results.
Thanks.
And I'll also just add, our next steps and where this master plan goes is not fully informed by the survey and what we see as the top priorities. So I mentioned earlier, I've been singing about research and development, and that didn't rank in the top cross section here. I still want our master plan to address that. If public perception of higher education would drop from 2 to the last year, I think we all still know that's something that we need to lean in on, or non-credit training too. So this vehicle here, the survey, is not the be all end all. But that said, the crosstab analyses are important.
Well, as we're looking to the last couple of minutes of this time together, I know I mentioned earlier in the presentation regular communication with this group, monthly communication. I think that looks like usually an email update of some form, but are there any preferences or strategies from other things like this that you all have that you all really like that would be helpful to us as we think about not only sharing information with you all, but also trying to get your feedback in these off periods between meetings?
Well, I mean, I think just knowing like if a work group meets, right, what work group met and what came out of that work group, what was the discussion points out of that work group. So again, if I'm not on that work group, at least I'm aware of the topics being discussed and the concerns and those types of things. So for me, I think the work groups obviously are going to kind of drive this. And then if you have other kind of interactions, what are the results of those interactions? What are the topics being discussed? What are the concerns? Those types of things.
I think email is one great way, Amanda, to share information, but there may be other ways you might utilize a team site or some other central place where documents are shared and stored so folks can access those as needed or share with their leadership teams, but that might be something you're considering as well.
I hadn't been thinking about a Teams, but that's a really great point. Or a place just like a repository for things to be accessed. Okay. Well, is there anything else on this matter that we should discuss while we're all together this afternoon?
I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for joining in today. This is not a group that's come together to discuss this in a very long time, and it's been absent from some conversations in the past. So I want to thank you for it. I'm always nervous ahead of a meeting like this where we bring everyone together in a virtual setting and hoping it goes well. And for us, we got our marching orders of where to go next on this. I just want to thank you for that, for your time and attention today. What I know is a very busy schedule for you. So thank you.
Well, I'll echo that thank you to everyone. You will be hearing more from us over the next couple of weeks and months. I really do appreciate a lot of the comments and the feedback and maybe following up directly on a few of those pieces. But I will formally adjourn this meeting and see you all again. Let's see, what was that date that I mentioned before? May 21st at 1:30 p.m. Thank you so much.